My name is Celeste Owens, and at 36, I've built a solid career as a freelance marketing consultant, working from my home in suburban Billings, Montana. For the past 18 months, my parents and my younger brother Preston have all been living with me. It started as temporary support. My parents downsized after retirement and needed a place to stay while sorting out their finances. And Preston, after years of job instability and mounting credit card debt, joined them to get back on his feet. I'd already helped them a lot, thousands of dollars over time for bills, car repairs, groceries, even clearing some of Preston's old debts. I thought family should stick together. Then came that Thursday. Preston asked to borrow my card for a few outfits. When he got back, he said casually, "I just used your card to buy a few outfits." The next morning, I opened my banking app. $3,600 gone overnight. When I showed my mom, she barely reacted. "Your brother is struggling. Help him out a bit." I didn't argue. I stayed quiet. That night, I called the bank and quietly froze every card and credit line tied to my accounts. At 8 a.m. the next day, the screaming started, and 15 minutes later, I got a call that changed our family forever. Before I continue, drop a comment if you've ever dealt with family financial drama or had to set hard boundaries. Tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe for more real stories about betrayal, tough choices, and protecting what you've worked for. I grew up in a typical middle-class family in Billings, Montana, where winters are long and cold and everyone usually gets around in their own cars. From early on, the differences between me and my siblings were clear. I was the one who saved every penny of my allowance, picking up weekend shifts at a local cafe during high school to fund my own college savings. Planning came naturally to me. I liked knowing there was a safety net. Preston, my younger brother, approached money in a completely different way. He spent freely on whatever caught his eye, video games, trendy sneakers, or eating out with friends, without thinking about tomorrow. It wasn't that he was careless out of malice. He just lived in the moment, and our parents rarely corrected it. My mom, Margaret Owens, has always had a soft spot for Preston. She saw his impulsiveness as part of his free spirit and feared that pushing him too hard would make him unhappy or cause him to pull away. Whenever he got into trouble with overspending, she would step in to fix it, convincing herself it was helping him avoid bigger problems down the line. My dad, Douglas Owens, is quieter and more easygoing. He hates confrontation and usually deferred to Mom on parenting decisions, offering a gentle word here or there, but never insisting on change. Extended family included my Uncle Shane, Mom's younger brother, and my Aunt Diane, his wife. They lived a few hours' drive away in a quieter part of the state, running a small hardware store together. We saw them for Thanksgiving or summer barbecues where stories were shared and everyone pretended the family's little issues weren't growing. As we got older, my role in supporting the family financially started small but grew steadily. When Dad had a minor health scare a few years back, the out-of-pocket costs added up quickly, and I covered several thousands so they wouldn't dip too deeply into retirement savings. Mom's car needed major transmission work one winter, stranding them in the snow-prone streets of Billings, so I paid for the repairs without hesitation. Preston's debts were another story. He'd max out cards on electronics or concert tickets, then panic when payments were due. I bailed him out multiple times, transferring money to avoid late fees or collection agencies, always hearing how this would be the last time. There were smaller things, too, the everyday expenses that chipped away. Groceries ran higher with extra mouths to feed during visits, or when Preston moved back home briefly after a bad breakup with a roommate. I'd pick up the tab for family dinners out, phone upgrades when contracts ended, even streaming services so everyone could relax in the evenings. Medical copays for routine checkups. A new furnace filter during a harsh cold snap. Or gas money for job searches that rarely panned out. I handled them quietly, telling myself it was what family did. When my parents finally retired, they decided to downsize their longtime home to something smaller and more manageable. The sale process dragged on with inspections and paperwork delays, leaving them in limbo longer than expected. Moving costs piled up unexpectedly, and they asked if they could stay with me in the meantime. My suburban house had spare rooms, a finished basement, and enough space for comfort, so I welcomed them without a second thought. Preston's situation worsened around the same time. His latest job at a retail store ended abruptly after attendance issues, leaving him with no income and mounting overdue bills. Mom worried constantly about him being on his own in a tough rental market. So, she proposed he join them at my place temporarily to cut expenses and focus on finding something steady. Dad agreed it made sense, and I couldn't say no. Seeing them all together felt like the supportive thing to do, a way to help everyone reset. The arrangement began smoothly enough with shared meals and routines that reminded me of easier times. But over the months, the reliance deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Preston's requests for cash started as occasional $20 for gas to a potential interview, $50 for a haircut to look professional. Mom would often relay them if he seemed hesitant, framing it as minor help during a rough patch. Dad expressed gratitude, but didn't question the pattern. Soon the asks became routine: money for new shoes because his old ones wore out quickly, or a gym membership to build confidence for job hunting. Takeout orders multiplied when cooking felt like too much effort after long days, and I covered them to keep peace. Subscriptions renewed automatically on shared accounts, and small emergencies like a cracked phone screen or unexpected parking tickets always landed on my plate. I continued paying because turning them down felt like abandoning family, especially with Mom's pleading looks and reminders of how much we needed each other. Yet beneath it all, a quiet unease grew. Each transfer or paid bill added to an invisible tally in my mind, a reminder that my hard-earned stability was slowly supporting everyone else's. I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the love that bound us. But the weight settled deeper with every passing month, waiting for the moment it would become too heavy to ignore. One Thursday afternoon in late September, the air in Billings was cool and comfortable with leaves just starting to turn yellow. I was deep into a major deadline for a client. My home office had become my sanctuary amid the busier household, a corner room with good natural light where I could spread out notes and screens without interruptions. The client project involved rebranding for a local business, something that required careful attention to details and timelines, and I was determined to deliver ahead of schedule to build stronger relationships. The day had been productive so far, with emails exchanged and drafts coming together nicely. I was in the zone, sipping tea and reviewing color palettes when a soft knock broke my concentration. Preston stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of hesitation and eagerness that I had seen before. He explained that he had lined up what sounded like a solid interview for a supervisor role at a chain store in town, one with benefits and room to grow. To feel confident walking in, he needed a couple of proper outfits: shirts that fit well, pants without wear, perhaps a belt or shoes to complete the look. He assured me it wouldn't be much, just basics to replace his worn items. These requests had become familiar over time. There had been other interview opportunities where similar needs arose: a jacket for a warehouse position that fell through, ties for a sales job that didn't pan out, or shoes for a restaurant shift that ended quickly. Each time I provided support, believing that looking the part might help him secure something lasting and ease the burden on everyone. Wanting to keep my momentum, I didn't stop to discuss it at length. I pulled out my backup credit card from the desk drawer, the one reserved for smaller or unexpected expenses with a reasonable limit. Handing it over, I clearly instructed him to stay around $300 or $400, sufficient for practical pieces from affordable stores. Preston thanked me sincerely, saying he'd head to the mall nearby and be back soon with the card. He left, and the house settled back into quiet as I returned to my work. The hours slipped by, revisions turned into final tweaks, and daylight shifted to dusk outside the window. It was well into evening when I heard the front door open and bags rustling in the entryway. Preston entered the living room carrying multiple shopping bags from upscale stores, the kind with sleek logos and higher price tags that catered to trends rather than necessities. He unpacked enthusiastically, laying out items on the couch. A fitted button-down in premium fabric, slim jeans from a designer line, polished leather shoes, accessories like a watch and belt that matched perfectly. He changed into one complete outfit, immediately adjusting the collar and sleeves in front of the mirror. Mom's face lit up as she complimented how mature and put together he appeared, saying it was exactly the image that would impress any hiring manager. Dad agreed quietly, noting the qualities seemed good and expressing hope that this interview would lead to positive changes. I observed from the kitchen doorway, offering a neutral comment while an uncomfortable feeling grew stronger. The volume and brands of the purchases clearly exceeded the modest amount we'd discussed. Yet, the positive energy from my parents made confrontation feel out of place in the moment. Dinner followed shortly after with talk revolving around the potential job, questions about the company, preparation tips, and optimism that this could mark a turning point. Preston seemed energized by the new clothes, describing how they made him feel capable. The conversation flowed easily among the three of them, filled with encouragement and light plans for the week ahead. Throughout the meal, I participated minimally, my mind drifting to the saved card information on the shared family laptop that Preston often used for browsing listings or applications. It had been convenient for legitimate group purchases in the past, like household supplies or gifts, but now it raised a subtle concern about easy access that I hadn't fully considered before. As the evening wound down, the unease lingered quietly, a sense that this instance might differ from the others in ways I couldn't yet pinpoint. The next morning, Friday, as was my daily habit, I opened the banking app while sipping coffee. The routine had always brought a sense of control, a quick check to confirm everything was in order before starting work. That day, the screen loaded with notifications that made my stomach drop. Transaction after transaction from the previous evening. Each one from familiar online retailers and in-store purchases at the mall. I scrolled slowly, adding them up in my head as the total climbed higher than anything reasonable for a few outfits. Designer labels, multiple shirts, pants, shoes, even accessories, and what looked like gift cards, $3, $600 in all, far beyond the limit I had set. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a simple mistake or forgotten charge. The pattern showed deliberate choices over several hours. I found Preston in the kitchen helping himself to breakfast. Mom and Dad were there, too, chatting about weekend plans. I held up my phone and asked him directly about the charges, keeping my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. Preston glanced at the screen, his face flushing before he looked away. At first, he denied knowing how it could have happened that way, suggesting perhaps a glitch or additional items he thought were necessary for variety. When I pointed out the timestamps and specific stores, he shifted, admitting he had gone a bit further, but insisting, "I thought you'd be okay with it." He explained that seeing the options available made him realize he needed more than basics to really stand out. And since I had covered things for him before, he assumed it would be fine this time, too. Mom jumped in immediately, her tone protective and dismissive. "Family shouldn't count money like this," she said firmly, placing a hand on Preston's shoulder. "He's trying to get back on his feet, and you've helped before without making a fuss. This is just part of supporting each other." Dad sat quietly at the table, stirring his coffee without meeting my eyes, his discomfort clear, but no words coming to challenge her. The words hit harder than the charges themselves, echoing all the times I had stepped up without complaint. I felt the accumulated frustration rise, years of covering gaps and excusing patterns flashing through my mind. I didn't raise my voice or prolong the argument in that moment. Instead, I told them calmly that I needed time to review everything fully and would handle it after thinking it through. The kitchen fell silent as I walked back to my office, closing the door behind me. Inside, the disappointment crashed over me like a wave I had been holding back for too long. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the realization that my willingness to help had been taken for granted, turned into an expectation rather than appreciation. The trust one had extended repeatedly now felt broken in a way that couldn't be easily repaired. I sat at my desk staring at the transaction list again, the numbers blurring as the deeper hurt set in. All those previous sacrifices, the bills paid, debts cleared, daily expenses absorbed, had been acts of love, hoping to see real change and stability for everyone. Yet here was proof that the cycle continued with no acknowledgement of boundaries or consequences. The pain was sharp, a mix of anger at the betrayal and sadness for what our family dynamic had become. I had always put them first, believing it was my role as the one who had managed to build something secure. Now it felt like that security was being eroded piece by piece, and the person I had been, the patient, giving sister and daughter, was reaching a breaking point. That Friday evening, when the house had gone quiet and the autumn air in Billings felt still, the confrontation from earlier lingered in my mind as I moved through the routine of closing up the kitchen and turning off lights. Everyone had retreated to their rooms after an awkward dinner, the tension unspoken but thick enough to make conversation forced and brief. I waited until the sounds of television faded and doors clicked shut before returning to my office. The room was dimly lit by the desk lamp, casting long shadows that matched the heaviness I felt inside. Sitting down, I opened the banking app once more, this time examining every single transaction with deliberate care. The list confirmed what I had suspected. Multiple purchases spaced over a short window, from clothing sites to accessory stores, each one adding up in a way that showed planning rather than impulse in the moment. Seeing it laid out so clearly removed any lingering hope that it might have been a misunderstanding or accidental overreach. The realization settled like a weight on my chest, a mix of betrayal and sorrow for how far things had drifted. I had always tried to see the best in Preston, attributing his struggles to bad luck or lack of opportunities, but this felt different, more intentional. Taking a steadying breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the bank's after-hours support line. The representative was patient as I explained the situation, providing account details and highlighting the specific unauthorized activity. I requested an immediate freeze on the primary card, the backup one Preston had used, and any older linked credit lines that had been shared for family emergencies in the past. They processed the request efficiently, assuring me the holds would activate right away and prevent further use. Additionally, they noted the dispute for investigation, mentioning that provisional credits could appear within days while they reviewed the evidence I planned to submit. Hanging up brought a small measure of relief, knowing the immediate risk was contained. The practical step felt empowering in its simplicity, a concrete action amid the emotional turmoil swirling around. Still, the night's quiet prompted me to seek another perspective. I called Dad on his cell, knowing he often kept it by his bed for late-night reading. He answered softly, aware of the hour. I recounted the day's events in full, the discovery, the confrontation, Mom's defense, and my decision to involve the bank. He listened without interruption, his occasional sighs conveying the difficulty of the situation. When I finished, he spoke thoughtfully, acknowledging that Mom's tendency to shield Preston had allowed patterns to persist longer than they should have. He expressed concern for everyone's well-being, but emphasized that protecting my own financial stability was important, especially after all the support I had provided over time. His advice was gentle yet firm: take the steps needed to safeguard what I had worked for, as continuing without limits could lead to greater harm for all of us in the long run. Hearing that from him, the parent who usually stayed neutral, validated the choice in a way that eased some of the isolation I felt. The conversation ended with mutual understanding, though unspoken worry about how Mom would react hung between us. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet for a while longer, reflecting on the path that had led here. All those instances of help, the bills covered, debts cleared, daily contributions absorbed, had been given freely out of love and a desire to see the family thrive. Yet they had gradually shifted into an unspoken expectation, one that eroded appreciation and encouraged more requests. This boundary set in the stillness of the night wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about preserving the life I had built through discipline and sacrifice, while acknowledging that unconditional aid without reciprocity wasn't sustainable. The decision carried pain, a deep ache for the closeness we once had and the hope that things could have turned out differently. But it also brought a quiet resolve, a commitment to my own well-being that felt long overdue amid the years of putting others first. As the house remained silent around me, I closed the laptop and prepared for bed, knowing the morning would bring new challenges, but feeling for the first time in a while that I was choosing a path forward on my own terms. Saturday morning around 8 o'clock, I was making coffee when shouting erupted from the living room. The outburst started suddenly. Mom's voice carrying through the house with a mix of frustration and alarm that made me pause mid-pour. I walked toward the sound, finding her pacing with phone in hand, repeatedly trying to complete a simple online order for groceries that the weekend required. The screen showed decline messages for every attempt, from the card she usually used for household shopping to backups linked in the past. The freeze had extended to all associated accounts, blocking even routine purchases like food or household supplies that the family depended on daily. Preston appeared moments later, drawn by the noise, asking what had happened. When Mom explained that nothing would process, he tested his own digital wallet and saw the same restrictions, his initial confusion turning to visible panic as the implications sank in. He looked at me directly, raising his voice to say, I never truly supported the family, pointing out how much we all shared the same space and resources. Yet, I chose to cut access without warning. The accusation carried layers of built-up grievance, framing the situation as a lack of care despite the history of assistance. Mom's reaction escalated quickly, her shock giving way to directed anger. She dialed my number even though I was in the next room, launching into a lengthy outpouring the instant I picked up. How could you do this to your own mother and brother after everything we've been through together? She demanded, voice trembling with emotion. She went on about the struggles they faced daily, how this left them unable to handle basic needs, and how it felt like abandonment when they had nowhere else to turn. The words flowed in a stream, mixing pleas with reminders of past difficulties we had navigated as a unit, implying that family loyalty should override any individual concerns. Preston interjected from the background, reinforcing that the support I had given in the past made this feel particularly harsh. The call became a back and forth of heightened emotions, with Mom questioning my priorities and expressing fear about immediate practical problems like filling the fridge or getting essentials. In the midst of the intensity, her frustration led her to end our conversation abruptly and immediately reach out to Shane and Diane. She recounted the events through tears, describing how I had suddenly cut off all financial support to the family, leaving them stranded and unable to manage even ordinary expenses. Their responses came through on speaker, full of sympathy for her position and concern about the sudden change. Shane asked for details, echoing that families should find ways to work through issues without such measures, while Diane added comforting words about how difficult it must be for Mom. In that moment, I stood nearby, taking in the scene as the morning's chaos unfolded around attempts to find alternative ways to pay for things. Each failure adding to the upset. The house, usually calm on weekends, filled with urgent discussions about short-term solutions and longer-term impacts. The reactions revealed how accustomed everyone had become to the arrangement, treating access as a given rather than a privilege extended out of generosity. Watching it play out brought a profound sadness, a sense of loss for the mutual respect that should have underpinned our shared living. The calls and conversations continued for a while, with Mom relaying her perspective in full, seeking validation from extended family. The weight of their unified concern pressed in, making the boundary I had set feel even more isolating in the moment. As the initial storm subsided into tense quiet, the reality of the shift settled over the household, marking a clear divide that conversation alone wouldn't bridge easily. Sunday afternoon, the sound of a car pulling up outside, my parents along with Shane and Diane had driven over to talk things through. Everyone gathered in the living room, the air heavy from the moment they stepped inside. Mom and Preston took seats close together, their expressions a mix of hurt and defiance as the conversation began. Mom started by recounting how much I had helped in the past, voice breaking as she listed the support that had kept them afloat for so long. She framed the current situation as sudden abandonment, saying it felt like I was turning my back after years of being the one they could count on. Preston nodded along, adding that the freeze made him feel cut off completely, especially when he was trying to improve his situation. Shane spoke up early, his tone firm yet disappointed. Family helps unconditionally, he said. Especially after all you've done for them, it doesn't make sense to stop now when they need you most. Diane joined in with more emotion, eyes misty as she stressed, blood is thicker than money. They're your parents and only brother. You can't just walk away like this. Dad sat between them, attempting to mediate. At first, he suggested giving another chance, reminding everyone that family sticks together through hard times and a compromise could be found if we all calm down. I listened without interrupting, then laid out the full picture calmly. I showed printed transaction records from the misuse alongside a summary of the thousands I had contributed over time for bills, repairs, debts, and daily living costs. The room grew quieter as the numbers sank in. Dad studied the pages carefully, his initial neutrality shifting to understanding as he saw the extent of the pattern. The discussion heated up from there. Mom accused me of being cold and unforgiving, saying no amount of past help justified treating her this way in her retirement years. Shane and Diane piled on, calling the decision heartless and questioning how I could prioritize money over family bonds. Preston stayed mostly silent until the tension peaked, then blamed me for being stingy despite having the means to continue supporting everyone comfortably. The attacks came from multiple sides, voices overlapping with pleas and criticisms that made the space feel smaller. I felt the weight of their disappointment, the expectation that I should keep giving no matter what. When there was a brief pause, I spoke clearly and firmly. I explained that the support had always been voluntary, not an obligation, and the recent events showed it was no longer sustainable or healthy. I stated there would be no more financial help, that they needed to move out within 30 days, and that I would limit contact with anyone who continued to enable or excuse the behavior. The announcement landed heavily. Mom looked stunned. Preston angry. Shane and Diane shocked into silence for a moment before protesting again. Dad, after a long pause, expressed quiet support for my position, acknowledging that boundaries were necessary for everyone's long-term good, even if it hurt now. The meeting ended without resolution, with them leaving in a subdued but strained mood. The drive back for Shane and Diane would be long, filled with discussion I could only imagine. In the months that followed, as Billings entered its harsh winter with snow piling up and temperatures dropping, the consequences became clear. The disputed charges were reversed by the bank, but the freeze and dispute flags affected linked credit reports. Preston and my parents found their scores lowered significantly, making it difficult to secure a new rental on their own in a market where landlords checked credit thoroughly. They ended up crowding into Shane and Diane's smaller home temporarily, a tight fit that strained those relationships too. The extended family on Mom's side distanced themselves from me completely, viewing my stance as unforgiving. Contact with Dad remained occasional and careful, mostly short calls where he shared updates without pushing reconciliation. Living alone again in the quiet house brought a profound peace. I hadn't realized how much I was missing the freedom to manage my own finances and space without constant demands. The relief was real, a lightness in daily routines and future planning. Yet it came with sadness for the irreparable break, a grief for the family closeness that might have been possible under different circumstances. The pain of loss lingered, a reminder of love that couldn't overcome repeated disrespect. Looking back, the experience taught me that true support respects boundaries, and enabling without accountability often harms more than it helps. Real family care sometimes means allowing natural consequences, even when it's the hardest choice. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. I truly appreciate you taking the time. If anything resonated or you have thoughts on family boundaries and money, please share in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else facing something similar.